pledge with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we'll start with roll call. Please state your name and whether you have a conflict of interest, starting with Ms. Ellsworth.
Shannon Ellsworth, no conflict.
Russell Phillips, no conflict.
Dave Anderson, no conflict.
Deborah Jensen, no conflict.
Andrew Howard, no conflict.
Jamin Rowan, no conflict.
Thank you, commissioners. All right, item 1, and this will be, this is a legislative item. The Community Development Department requests an amendment to the downtown streetscape standards to clarify right-of-way improvements for 100 West Street as redevelopment takes place. This has citywide impact, and Mr. Weaver will present item 1.
Thank you. So 2 weeks ago we met and we looked at the downtown master plan and we adopted the street cross section that you can see on the right side pertaining to the area highlighted in the red from 100 South to 600 South along 100 West. So the streetscape standards we then looked at to see, again, as this corridor as we're proposed is designated as a pedestrian corridor, what additional enhancements can we do along this corridor for what the streetscape section already has. And some concepts, initially some things that we looked at, we already have the wider sidewalk, this already said, but we talked, the idea is to have more public art on corners possibly along this corridor to enhance the corridor. Another thing is to have decrease the spacing between the trees, so we have trees closer together. One thing we noticed is having, in this zone, there is not a setback requirement for buildings, so they can be right up against the sidewalk up in the property line. And so with having additional trees closer together that are smaller, but still create the canopy, still gives that corridor effect. We looked at a couple different tree species to go along this area, so that way, one that's already intact and adding another one in the future to create one flowering at a different time of the year to enhance the corridor. Another thing we've talked about is having different colored markings for sidewalk as we go through at mid-block crossings and crosswalks. These are just some concepts showing the corridor. We think it's important to have a mid-block crossing at each spot along here, so probably 150 South would have to be looked at with the parking ramp. However, all the blocks south would have to have a mid-block crossing. And we thought that these mid-block crossings would be ideal spots to have a larger bricked area for pedestrian activity nodes on that area. This was just showing the design concept for 300 South at First West, which would have a pedestrian bicycle light at this area. Another thing that staff finds would be important is to have a wayfinding sign, especially at 100 South and 600 South, as people are coming from the Provo station or coming from downtown, to know that this corridor does link the two areas together. This is one of the signs example that we had from the signs that were approved a few years ago that should be in place in front of city buildings, but hasn't quite happened yet. But something more on the pedestrian scale versus the vehicle wayfinding signs that we see currently. This is an example of a pedestrian activity node. This is currently in Philadelphia, and the concept is you have something interesting outside, something different, a reason to stay outside. This is a swing covered. I think it's a very interesting concept for it. So we're trying to see what kind of ideas we could find to have at these mid-block crossings / pedestrian nodes. Another thing that staff wants to incorporate into the standard is the imprint of street names. a lot of the pioneer neighborhoods have this already intact, but as streets have been improved, the crossings, the crosswalks, etc., the pavement it's been paved over, so you don't always have it. But I'd like to bring that back along this corridor, part of the history of it. Additionally, another thing to give this corridor a unique feature, identity along the whole corridor is we currently have different amenities in the streetscape standards: benches, trash cans, drinking fountains, bicycle racks, and lights. We had a concept idea of changing the color palette just for that section of all of those amenities to the color PMS 299, which is essentially the blue that we find in the Provo flag. It's a color that's already Provo's already familiar with, just to give this area something, a uniqueness feature along this corridor. And lastly, as we continue to work on this document, we would have a cross-section, not only of the corner, but also one of the mid-block crossing showing the layout of it, paver layout. We already have this currently in the downtown streetscape standard, but since 100 West would have a differential street treatment for it, we find it's needed to have a pattern for this section. So again, this is a first reading of this item. This is new. Staff is seeking your input on thoughts on this, what types of things you would like to see along this corridor as well, and seeking advice from commissioners.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments for staff on item 1? Mr. Howard?
I think the back-in 45-degree parking is probably a big improvement. Have you seen this in other cities?
We currently have it in Salt Lake. That's the only city in Utah that has it, along near Capitol Theater. City Council liked this as well. They approved the back-in 45 last week.
I can see where I think educating its use will be something, but I think it'll catch on rather quickly.
Mr. Phillips?
I have a comment on the parking section. I have an opportunity to be in Salt Lake on a regular basis, and so I visited streets with this back-end parking area that we're talking about right now, and watching the actual thing happen. There's two things that happened that I thought was a disadvantage to the back-end parking. One, it's much more difficult for us to watch for these bicyclers who are going to be using. We have a bicycle path right behind our car lanes that we're going to back over, and then these cars have to pull up and then back up, and it makes a congestion on those streets. I visited them 4 times in the last week, and every time I've been there at different times, we have that same issue. It'd be real simple for us to adopt the same process and just park straight in. I mean, the driver could come in and park, and he has a clear view of the bicycles coming onto him, and he can
Or
tell
she.
if there's an open parking stall.
I know a council did see the cross-section and did approve that last week, however, for it. So this is just looking at the design standards along the street, not the back-in 45-degree.
Ms. Ellsworth, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could go to the first slide. Yeah, are we going to see a statue like this?
That'd be great. I know the downtown master plan talks about public art, and I thought on the corners along the intersections would be a great location for the public art, for the display. This area has kind of a history of that too, but that way the corners would have some kind of feature along it versus the mid-block crossings.
What does the visibility triangle look like? How far back does that go?
I just put that in on just a concept. It
Yeah.
should be 25 feet. Side triangle is
Okay.
what it should be.
Okay. Thanks.
Mr. Howard?
I'm not opposed to art, but it's always in the eye of the beholder. Is there a process for choosing the art?
That I'm not sure on that.
I was going to say, I like a lot of the ideas here. I like the ideas of the trees closer together, a different kind of tree than you might see other places to give the corridor a real identity. I really like, I mean, I don't remember having talked about the different textured, or you were saying colored, sidewalks at those pedestrian nodes, which I really like a lot. I'm a huge fan of the mid-block crossing. And again, just the way that the way that the design works, and you might still have this with whatever parking you do, but the way that the parking currently is structured or drawn in relationship to the sidewalks and the extension of the sidewalk, you really create a decent space to have something, whether it's public art or seating areas, or something that allows people to feel comfortable there, linger longer. I mean, I think that's really nice. I mean, I really like the amount of space dedicated to the pedestrian in the drawing that we've seen, and in the language that we have. So I mean, I like a lot of what I see here.
What items are you looking for input on?
Particularly on ideas for what could draw people to example of like a pedestrian node, some kind of a street feature that you'd like to see along the street, and thoughts on different color treatment for amenities. I think the only place I've seen it mostly in, I know 9th and 9th in Salt Lake, their street lights are kind of a purple. Kind of gives that node a little interesting dynamic, some character.
I think that you could perhaps incorporate public art in some of those mid-block crossings.
Definitely.
Where you're creating a pedestrian space. It could be functional public art. For example, the example you showed with the swing is really sort of like a big public art installation. It's sculptural, it's kinetic. I really like the proposal.
I mean, I would say, and this is beyond what we're looking at, but I mean, what's going to determine the liveliness of the area is going to be, what kind of commercial or, getting that mix right is going to be what's going to bring people there, rather than the art or a swing or whatever. I mean, that's going to add to what needs to be a kind of base layer of what draws people to be there in the first place. And so I think that, again, what I see here would add to that experience if the right institutions and the right mix of housing and commercial space are in place. And then again, as we talked about last meeting, for me, the real tricky thing, which is beyond the scope of what I'm seeing here, or is at least not addressed here, is that, getting people from Center through New Skin, that's just going to be a really tricky problem to solve, figuring out how to get people through that building, through the parking garage, ramp. There's quite a bit of not dead space. It's a nice enough space, but it's not a logical flow. So for me, that's the real trick of that's not addressed here in what I see here. But I really like what we've got here.
I agree. I think overall it's a really strong plan, or a really strong revision. And I agree that New Skin creates a barrier that I'll be excited to see how people interact or move around that. I think you mentioned you were interested in how we could create nodes that people interact with. And this might sound very millennial, because it is, but people love to take photos. And any kind of urban art, street art, anything you can interact with that is selfie worthy, that is Instagram worthy, people will be all over that.
Who do we anticipate is going to pay for the improvements?
So as the developments come in along this corridor, the developer would be paying for the street improvement on that side. So again, particularly why we focused this to be the wider walk pathway on the east side of the roadway is because we do have such large developments coming into the city that these two sections, a whole block and half a block, will get built in due time.
So the improvements will occur incrementally over time as
Correct.
redevelopment happens.
Correct. The 400 elements that we saw October, they've been aware that this has been in works for a number of months.
That's great to get out ahead of the development coming in.
Yes.
Any other comments or questions for staff from the commissioners?
One last thing, additional things you'll be seeing in the next version of this document will just be some clarification for things that just needed to be cleaned up a little bit more, maybe drafted better for better clarification that we're seeing from the applicant when they are seeking understanding what we're meaning.
Great, thank you. All right, I would like to invite any neighborhood chairs who are present who would like to speak to this item to please come forward. Any members of the public who would like to speak to this item? All right, seeing none, I will turn it back over to the commissioners for a motion or further discussion. And we'll be making a recommendation to municipal council on this item.
I'm prepared to make a motion
Mr. Rowan?
on item number 1. I move that we recommend to the municipal council approval of the proposed ordinance amendment to the downtown streetscape standards to clarify right-of-way improvements for 100 West Street as redevelopment takes place.
Thank you, Mr. Rowan. Do we have a second for Mr. Rowan's motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Mr. Howard. All those in favor of forwarding a positive recommendation for item 1 to municipal council?
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? No opposed, so we will forward a positive recommendation, and that was unanimous. Just a quick question for staff. Items 2 and 3 are related, correct? Shall I read them in together? Okay. Right. Item 2 is legislative, so we'll be making a recommendation. Item 3 is for the Planning Commission to approve or disapprove. Item 2, 422 South Holdings LLC requests a zone change from A1.5 to R1.8 to facilitate an 18-lot subdivision located at approximately 504 South, 2470 West in the Provo Bay neighborhood. And then item 3, Paul Pedersen requests concept plan approval for Ethan Meadows, an 18-lot, single-family subdivision located at 2450 West 560 South in a proposed R1.8 zone. This is in the Provo Bay neighborhood, and Mr. Weaver will again present items 2 and 3.
So this is the location of the proposed rezone. It abuts 2 collector roads, 560 South and 2470 West, which are both collectors. The current zoning of the area is A15. As you can see on the right, we have adopted the future land use map for the southwest area, and it aligns with the future land use map as being residential for this area. It also matches the surrounding uses of the neighborhood. They are R18 homes. Some of them are R110 homes within the neighborhood. The layout of the subdivision has 18 lots. The one primary issue that we have worked on with the applicant is since 2470 and West and 560 South are both collectors, driveways are not permitted to be onto those roadways. And so what we worked on is between lots 17 and 18, there's an easement that goes between the 2 lots to access lots 13, 14, and 15. So that way those homes that abut each collector are not backing out onto the roadways as future development, as the new zoning code allows for this. The property, or the applicant, we worked with them, they also have the street that's on the north side of the property that will abut to that future neighboring lot, showing the possibility of how that could connect in with the city's network for connectivity for that area as possible. However, the proposed rezone, it aligns with the future land use plan for residential. No neighborhood concerns have been brought to staff's attention as of yet for this, and staff seeks a recommendation for both items, the concept plan and for the rezone. Just to show a couple of renderings. This is just showing kind of that easement in the back way. One item, or one possible thought is homes with a backyard can have a six-foot fence, and if they have a fence up along their backyard, that could create an interesting drive access to accessing these three lots. So potentially having a lower fence for that area, or 3 feet up, and then 3 feet has to be spaced, so that way you can have some visibility back there, possibly, is one concern. This is the last slide showing the renderings for these homes within this area. The applicant has did 2 different cul-de-sacs just directly west of this property, probably this last year or so. So they have done homes within this area.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for staff on items 2 and 3? Mr. Pepperoni?
So Mr. Weaver just mentioned some possible restrictions on fencing that are not codified. So if the developer is agreeable to those types of restrictions, there would have to be a development agreement entered into as part of the rezoning between the developer and the city council to memorialize those restrictions. Just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Mr. Rowan?
Of staff. So does the road that lots 13, 14, and 15 are on the road to the east, does that does not come out to 560 South? It's just a road to access those homes, not?
Correct.
Okay.
So it'll go just right here, I believe, come up and go down.
And then lots 13 and 18 are accessed off
So-
of,
The easement will be for lots 13, 14,
Okay.
and 15.
and lot 18 faces
This street
that
right
street, okay.
here. And same with lot 17.
I mean, it may, I don't know what the right response is. It may just have been the angle of the image. I mean, that looks funky to me. just the ways that the fronts of the houses. Maybe it's hard to see how wide that road is right there. Or maybe, just something about the image makes it feel like those houses are right up in the backyards of the other ones, and it's just different. I'm not.
So the shaded areas you see are the entire building envelope minus, setbacks. So
Okay.
houses fit within those shaded areas, but I don't anticipate that any house would take up the entire shaded area.
Okay.
That's a building envelope.
So the
Buildable envelope.
That's correct.
image that we have, I mean, it just.
The
must
other
be a-
image, go to the next one.
Yeah, the aerial.
Is that the image?
I mean,
or-
maybe it's in part because we don't see that, I mean, all we see is the edge of the roof. In other words, that's kind of now over that street that makes it look perhaps more, closer to the back of the house than it might really be.
Right, so,
Does that make sense?
yeah, we probably shouldn't refer to that as a street, because it really isn't, it really is a
Whatever it is,
driveway.
a driveway.
Yeah,
Okay.
Or an alley.
right.
It'll be privately owned. Ms. Ellsworth?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm still confused. Why are these not facing, or are they facing?
They're facing the street, but city code prohibits us allowing driveways accessing collector roads.
Oh, okay.
So that it's intended that the houses would face the roads.
Oh, I see.
But be accessed from the rear.
Okay.
I was confused on that point as well.
Oh, it's our fault for making it clear. Let's go back to the plat. So I suppose if these property owners wanted to, they could also access the driveway if they wanted to. But because of the impact that has on your backyard, my guess is those owners won't want to do that. They'll want to have their driveway off the front and have a backyard in the back.
Got it.
We went through half a dozen scenarios of how to skin this cat, of having houses face the streets, but not access either of these collector roads. And it took a lot of creative thinking, and fortunately, the developer's been cooperative in coming up with some solution. This is the best alternative I think we were able to come up with.
That makes a lot more sense. I thought lots 13, 14, 15 were facing east.
No.
Yeah.
Mr. Anderson?
I'm not sure who to address the question to necessarily, but we've talked a little bit in recent meetings
Plugged in.
about. Lights on?
Nobody's home.
I can speak up. We've talked in recent meeting. Is that on now? Okay. Okay. For whatever it's worth, street cross sections. What are we talking about here? There's a change or two in the works, and I'd sure love to be able to provide this developer with an opportunity to take advantage of what we've been talking about, even if it's maybe not adopted and on the books, so to speak, today. Any thoughts there?
At one point in CRC, we did talk about narrowing the asphalt width, and David Decker was in the meeting and agreed that for the number of lots this is, the asphalt width could be reduced. But the right-of-way that we're anticipating for those cross-sections you've been looking at isn't much different from what we have now. So I don't know if the right-of-way will change any, but it was discussed in a CRC meeting, reducing the asphalt. I don't know if David remembers any details to that, but it was discussed.
There was one specific cross-section that we talked about in the work session a couple of weeks ago. It was something on the order of 29 feet of asphalt, might have been 30, with right-of-way width of 60, inclusive of everything, sidewalk. And it seems like, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but there seemed to be some consensus that that would kind of be the mainstay right-of-way that would be predominantly used in settings like this. And I guess just checking to see if that's maybe a direction we could go here versus what we've seen previously on projects like this.
Thanks, Mr. Day.
David Day with Public Works. Yeah, and I think we have an opportunity to use that here. By the time this project gets the rezoning and all of that, we'll still have opportunity to change that if that change to the cross-section gets through City Council and it looks like it's going to get through, then we could probably make that change to this project so that they were able to utilize that narrower width.
I would sure hope so. I mean, I really appreciated the discussion that we had, again, a couple of weeks ago. I've got a few questions that I'd still really love to just run by the Public Works folks. Would it be possible maybe in a couple of weeks or sometime soon to take some more time in a work session to talk about the cross sections? And frankly as well, just kind of what some of the criteria might be that would define when some get used and others can't be employed.
And hopefully our parametrics is our consultant. That's what they're working on right now is criteria for, well, one of the things they're working on. They're putting the whole transportation master plan package together. But one of the items that they're working on is that criteria for when would you use this road and when would you use a different road. And it's looking like it's more tied to zone. So like a R1 would be able to use the narrowest widths, where an R, whatever, 2 or
More dense
LDR,
zones
more
would have
dense
a-
would have to
Okay.
probably grow a little because you'd expect more traffic.
Do you think in a couple of weeks they'd be ready to talk through some of that stuff?
We can check with them. We probably put it on the agenda for the work thing, the work meeting, and then if they're not ready, we can talk about cross sections without that other conversation, but
Okay.
it's probably worth doing.
That's the only thought I had, just relative to the design, so.
Any other questions for Mr. Day while he's up here? All right, thank you, Mr. Day. Any other questions or comments for staff? Ms. Ellsworth?
The fire department was okay with this?
Yes, because the fire can access the homes still on the collector routes, so they have full access.
They'll never pull down the driveway. The fire truck will never go down the driveway.
Any other comments, commissioners? All right, I will ask the applicant, Mr. Pedersen, to please come forward, state your name for the record, and present your project to us.
Hello, my name's Paul Peterson. I came up with this a couple of years ago when I started doing this subdivision across the street. The original owners, the Bullocks, approached me about building them a home and then possibly developing their property. Meanwhile, his mom fell ill, and so he kept approaching me, and I was like, I'm not really into developing. I like to buy developed lots. So he came to me again and said, I really want you to get it just because I like your custom homes. And so I kind of do multiple. I provide any size custom home, so I don't care what size it is. I don't turn you away, and that's kind of the uniqueness of my company. So we started coming up with a lot of different solutions. It's in months and months and months of different designs. And so we'd like to get going as soon as possible, just to not create any hardships and not miss a economic boom opportunity. We feel if we get delayed anymore, it could cause, you never know what next year holds. So if we can't get going in a good running start this year, who knows what happens in 2020. We've kind of varied. We started off with the 19 to 18 lot subdivision. It was an L shape, where it wasn't going into the neighbor's lot at first, but that was kind of going with the problem with not having any homes on the collector roads. We came up with Javin and David ideas of how to access those lots without them emptying onto the collector roads. So. Yeah, I don't know what else you want to hear from me. I'd have questions or whatever you guys want to add this.
May I point out one thing? This concept you see on this property is not proposed by the developer. The city requires, on subdivisions like this, for developers to show how the adjacent property around them may develop in the future. At one point, this was intended to just, like you said, be this kind of L with a knuckle right here. Well, that would then mean that this would have to develop sometime in the future off some type of cul-de-sac. That just isn't good for connectivity and a whole lot of other things. So the city asked the developer to provide a concept for this property. This developer does not control this property. He's not intending to build this. This was a city ask. So he's simply fulfilling something the city asked him to do by showing this.
So that essentially just shows future connectivity should those parcels develop.
A possibility of how it could develop if at some point that property owner finally decides or eventually decides to develop.
Great, thank you.
With that, I've heard that you guys have shown some consensus with providing future refunds on some of the stubbing of the utilities. Just because to create that stubbing, it's probably going to cost me about $45,000 just to stub in future sewer, water, electric, and provide that for the future. So I've heard in future time, if there's usually it's like a 10-year period if someone develops, we could get a reimbursement from there.
That's right. That's something you work out with the Public Works Department. That's correct.
Great. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Peterson?
My question is, I guess, the plan is to develop these homes as you did across the street? I mean, just pre the sale of the lot and the owner would come up with the design for you?
So usually I work with them and an architect. My background is pre-architecture and then construction management from BYU. So I actually am unique. I sit down with clients and I come up with the designs right there with them, or we modify other designs. So if you've been to the Durant subdivision, which is across the street to the west, we've done some mid-century modern, or someone gave me a magazine from the 70s and said, I want to build this house, and to craftsmen, to some people designing their own homes, and I've helped them build that home that they designed. So I kind of I'm trying to create a different range of homes in the neighborhood just to give it some, it's increased the property values. I really struggled at first because there was no comps for the appraisers to compare to. And so they gave me a hard time about that. But like the Bullocks, when they came to me, they just said, we're just tired of seeing, same homes. We want to see uniqueness again and people doing what they want. So that's what I'm trying to provide. I had a question for Mr. Anderson, just the clarification on the cross section. Are you talking about the road on, let's see, is this the pointer? Can I use that or no? Okay. This road right here, making it narrower, these roads?
Forget about that. 480 or 460 south and 2420 west. And it was kind of hard for me to read until I blew it up on my computer.
Right now, it should be at 50 feet is what
50, yeah, so
58 was a normal. We did 50 was what you guys said I could do. If we went narrower, the problems we had was parking. You're not allowed to park on the road.
And I was assuming that it was a larger one, which shows what I don't know, I guess, about what we do. I thought it was probably the 70 that we were talking about, so I assumed maybe we were going down.
So right now, that they would be able to park on a 32-foot wide road with a 50-foot right of way. And with the big cross section, we could take that down to 30.
And still allow parking on both, or the street? Oh,
But he'd have to provide 5 more feet on each side for the 60 feet. Is that correct?
Yeah, it wouldn't really change,
so when,
It'd impact the lot size a little bit.
but the sidewalk would now be on city right of way rather than private.
Oh, so this would have the sidewalk on the outside of the 50.
Yeah,
So setbacks be measured same way,
from the
outside edge of the sidewalk.
so it would be back of sidewalks at front.
So they wouldn't,
how to implement that too.
Okay.
on paper, the lots would be smaller, but they'd be just as usable,
Yes.
right? Yeah, so I like that a lot. A little bit wider park strip then with that, I think, if I remember right. It's kind of part of the concept.
All of our park strips would be 7.
Yeah. I think that's a step in the right direction. Apparently it's not a big change, but
Any other questions, comments from Mr. Peterson? No? Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, at this time, I will invite the neighborhood chair for the Provo Bay neighborhood to speak to items 2 and 3.
My name's Neil Durant. I live right there across the street from what he thinks is going to be lot number 15.
Sir, are you the neighborhood chair?
Pardon?
Are you the neighborhood chair of the Provo?
I am.
Thank you.
Well, I'm a co-chair and the others aren't here, so I get to wear the big boy pants. Is there any way that we can go back and look at what the other zonings on the last 2 developments have been? What was it on my property there, Bill?
I thought yours was R18, but your average lot size was larger than that. Is that correct? Is my recollection correct?
Well, I thought we had one exemption, so it would be 1.8, but the others were a larger lot.
That's right.
What-
I think Mr. Durant averaged in about the 10,000 square foot range, but because he had a lot that was under, we gave it R18 zoning.
My question is, or my problem is, R18 is generally speaking what we have in the
Neighborhood.
Salisbury development.
Oh, okay.
Quite
That's
a
over
bit.
here, Salisbury Development? Or is that over here?
That's above. that right in there.
Okay.
That on mine is, let's call it, for practical purposes, a 110. Back here on Clydesdale's Bend, that is a 110. I really do not see where we need to take a step back on zoning. The house behind me is on a 10,000 square foot lot. And 3 months ago, that house sold for $509,000. So people are willing to pay for the ground that they get. We don't need to have it cut up and postage stamped sizes like this. Now, I've got all the respect for Paul. He promised me that at the end of the day, he and I were going to go home as friends. But we had a little bit over 6 acres that we sold for development, and we ended up with 18 houses there. They're coming in now with just under 6, 595 or something like that, Paul, and wanting the same amount. I don't like the smaller sizes. I don't want to feel that we're losing our individuality, our rights. I know that, Russ, you wouldn't want them in your backyard on that small a lot. I just, I'm just asking for a little bit of integrity and a little bit more research on this to where it can come to and work. But like I said, the house just behind me sold for $509. So the money is there to be had with the larger lot. Paul, you may not sell them all in the next month and a half, but they will sell. That's my concern. Not crazy about shared driveways or any of this high-density stuff that the Provo City has already decided they're going to try to shove in on the people on the west end of town. But I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but I'm on ground that our family has owned since 1932. So you can see where I'm just a little bit protective of what's going on. And I don't see a reason or a call to have the smaller lots put on us at this time or anywhere in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Durant. Are there any other neighborhood chairs present who would like to speak to items 2 and 3? All right, seeing none, are there any members of the public who would like to speak to items 2 and 3? And please come to the podium and state your name for the record. And we will be limiting, if we could have the timer. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Cody Davis. I live on 420 South, which is just north of the project location. I am at the entrance of the cul-de-sac there on the south side. And if you'd go forward to where we can see lots 6 and 7 of the projected plan. So lot 6 is on the east side of my lot, you can see there. I have an 18-foot easement on that east side. And then my neighbor to the east has an 8-foot easement for public utility and irrigation access. My question is, from what Paul was telling me, he's been asked to pull a 3-foot pipe down somewhere south from there. My question is, how is that going to impact the easement? I want to be able to build a fence. I don't want it torn down by tractors and stuff later on. So I'm curious how, if the easement is there, how can lot 6 be there in the first place? Second off, can I get rid of the easement and build a fence? Get my lot back. That'd be great.
Great, thank you. We'll be responding to all the public questions at the end of the public portion. Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to speak to items 2 and 3? Sir, at the end.
Hi, I'm Alan Griffin. I live directly east of Lot 1 and 2. And I would agree with Neil Durant and hope to see nice homes, which we see, but just a little bigger lots, just to kind of keep the area like it was, but still being developed forward. So that would be my comment, is just a little bigger, a little more space, and hope it doesn't impact me too much. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Griffin. Are there any other members of the community who would like to speak to this item? All right, seeing none, I will close it to public comment at this time, and I would invite Mr. Peterson to address any of the comments or concerns he heard.
Yeah, so we had a neighborhood meeting it was a while ago, 3 or 4 months ago. And we talked, and I did address some. We had 20 lots, 19, and I made them 18 lots. And most of them are 10,000 square feet, except for those top north ones. And that was mainly because of trying to keep the road. We have to be a certain distance away from each road intersection, right, Javin? It has to be 120, 112, something like that, from this center point to this center point of the road. And then we had to do the same from this center point to this center point. So that's kind of why those ended up that size. So it was kind of not by choice, but we tried to keep all these 10,000 square feet. I mean, that's pretty equivalent to what's across the street. They do range from 10,000 to 12,000, almost 13,000. There was 2 that were 13,000 something square feet on that old subdivision that's across the road that we were talking about. So what I generally had a meeting with is a lot of the people in the neighborhood came to me beforehand. As soon as they've seen I bought the property and they heard, a lot of their children have come to me. It wasn't them, it was their children. So Shannon can probably relate. The younger generation is not wanting a huge yard. I'm finding that it took me a couple of years longer to get through the subdivision, this last one, than it should have. So, and I'm just a one-man band, so I burned through a lot of interest payments in that time period. So we're trying to try not to go too small, but trying to have some larger lots. I've already had 3 or 4 people wanting to buy lots from me and work with me on a design. And they're looking to upgrade. So they're looking to do high-end homes. But I didn't want to cut off the people who want to live by their parents and just giving them an opportunity to build a nice home near their parents and do custom. Because normally I'm about the same price as you see the big box builders, or cheaper, and I'm providing custom-mality. They can do whatever they want to their house, so within reason. So I'd love to do this and just get going on it. I wasn't aware there was any, the last thing I heard was if we could go from 20 to 18, and I did that. So I'm hoping that will meet and get enough approval to get going. So I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes, sir.
Just out of curiosity, the people who've approached you about wanting lots or houses, are any of those people already living in the neighborhood?
Yes. I'd say 4 or 5 of them. They all grew up in that neighborhood. They're relatives of people that live in the neighborhood, or they're living currently in that neighborhood and they want to upgrade their house or build a retirement home. I've actually had some other couples that are looking to retire and they're like, I want to build a 1 level. This is a great chance for us to do that now. So they've talked about reserving it and then having them build in a year. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we've closed it to public comment, but we'll be addressing your questions from earlier. So, Mr. Pepperoni, would either of you like to address the questions about the easement and the piping of irrigation water? Mr. Day. Thank you.
So where this is a concept plan, we haven't worked out all of those details, but Normally, what would happen is they would end up piping that open ditch along the lot line and have to provide the same type of easement that occurs north of there. And we'll just have to work out that design. It may end up impacting Lot 6, but this plan isn't meant to be a final plan. It's just, this is what would work conceptually. So we haven't got to those details yet, but as those details are worked out, all of those easements would be shown, and they would come before you as the final plan.
Great. So the easement will remain in place, or is that to be?
Yes.
It will, okay. I think that was one of his questions.
And you also were concerned about being able to build a fence. So, I mean, is there a way you can address that?
Well, the intent's the ditch will be piped. I don't know if that impacts the fence or not. But if the fence was impacted, the developer would have to fix that back the way it was.
Great. Any other questions for Mr. Day? Thank you. All right, I'll turn it back over to the commissioners for further discussion. Ms. Ellsworth?
I think it's unique with this kind of back alley, but overall, I think it's a good development. And I'm not afraid of the smaller lot sizes or the smaller yards. In regards to our earlier discussion on natural resources and environmental issues, Utah is the second driest state, and we also have the second highest per capita water usage in the United States. So if we can reduce our lawns a little bit, I think that's a good thing.
Any other comments? Mr. Howard?
I'd just like to say that I kind of appreciate the variety being offered here in this development.
Any other comments, questions?
And I'll just say that I agree with both my fellow planning commissioners, and I appreciate the concerns about lot size, I guess, but I just don't see what's being sacrificed here. I mean, you have, as Mr. Peterson pointed out, I mean, the majority of the lots are over 10,000 square feet. Custom homes, it's just nearly impossible for me to imagine that this is going to sacrifice property values. I understand I haven't lived there or have family live there for nearly 100 years. I don't see the city as shoving anything down anybody's throat here in this case. I mean, I think that, as Ms. Seltzer's pointed out, what to not be kind of aware of resources is to shove the consequences of mismanagement upon other people in the community. And I feel like this is just fine. I think it's great, and I'd be prepared to make a motion unless other people have comments.
Mr. Phillips?
Just before you make the motion, we need to explain, it's been not just a short time ago that a group of people have spent a great deal of time on our Southwest City Plan. And in that plan, it calls out for the majority of the area, including the area that this development is. The lots actually can be smaller. So we're larger in that respect.
Thank you.
All right, I'll make a motion.
Mr. Rowan?
I move that we recommend approval of the proposed zone change from A15 to R18 to the municipal council for the location at approximately 504 South, 2470 West. It's occurring to me as I make that motion that we didn't really talk about a development agreement for the fencing of the backyards, though I'd be inclined to include that as part of the motion that the developer would enter into and work that out with staff.
All right, let me just reiterate. So item 2, you're recommending that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to municipal council, including including a stipulation for a development agreement to restrict fencing in the rear yards abutting the shared driveway to 3 feet? Is that correct? Do we need to be that precise about it? Okay. So you would just like to say there'll be a development agreement concerning the fencing in the rear driveways?
Yeah, the staff is going to work out the things that Javin referred to, I'm sorry. And the developer will be given an opportunity to see that language before it goes to city council, or by the time it goes to city council. So I think we understand what the issues are. I think you heard do you have any questions ever with the things that Javin raised? So I think we've got it.
Okay, perfect. All right, do we have a second for Mr. Rowan's motion?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Ms. Ellsworth. All those in favor of forwarding a positive recommendation to municipal council?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
I sustain.
Thank you. So 1 abstention, and the rest are positive. So the motion carries.
I'd like to make a motion on item number 3.
Mr. Rowan?
I recommend that we approve the concept plan subject to compliance with all CRC comments and requirements for the proposal located at 2450 West, 560 South in a proposed R18 zone.
All right. Do we have a second for Mr. Rowan's motion?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Ms. Ellsworth. All those in favor of approving item 3, concept plan?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
1 abstention.
Right, so that was unanimous with 1 abstention, and the motion carries. Right.
Madam Chair,
Ms. Ellsworth?
do we have 2 minutes where we can talk about the area-wide plan for the East Bay area?
Certainly.
So I went to a meeting that they held at East Bay in the mall, and they were just updating us on this process. It's in the very beginning. Part of this area is a brownfield, but they're taking in all of the mall north of that to like 6th or 7th south and out to basically out to where that post office is. And one question I have for staff, is economic development leading this with Stantec? And if it's a land use plan, what will be community development's role, the planner's role, and the planning commission's role?
Yes, economic development is leading out on it. If a land use plan comes out of this effort, it would be reviewed by staff and then brought to the planning commission and then on to the city council. So staff and planning commission will be intimately involved.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Rowan?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on a comment that Dave Anderson made in regards to the street widths. As we all know, we've had a couple of planning or pre-meetings in regards to some of the street cross-sections, and I know that engineering and public works are anxious to move that forward, and it sounds like you're waiting on additional information from your consultant. I just thought it might be wise to formalize in a motion and in this meeting exactly what we'd want to see before we are prepared to, as a planning commission, to hear and make a motion on that on the transportation master plan, which includes those streets widths. So I just kind of have thought of a few things, and I'm open to people adding, or we can talk about this. But again, it feels to me like we ought to formalize in some way a request for some of the information that we've been asking for, but haven't necessarily received. And it sounds like, to some degree, that may be a result of Public Works waiting on the consultant. So if people are okay with that, a couple of things that we really want to see before we feel like we can move forward are proposed street sections with dimensions by road classification. The street sections want to see the vehicular lane widths, the transit lane widths where applicable, bike lane widths, locations of all elements included within the proposed right-of-way. One of the things that I know we've been asking for is just more information about traffic volume threshold numbers, so trip counts. Sounds like there might be we're moving to a different way of thinking about what determines what road width we get. So I would like to see, as soon as you or the consultant has that, what's going to determine what cross sections we utilize. And then again, it's something I've been particularly interested in is thinking about maintenance budgets, kind of projecting forward. So I don't know if the Public Works has like a kind of, here's 20 years out, what we anticipate our budget being. And again, even if we can get even more specific, here's about how much we anticipate it would cost to take care of a certain kind of, not square footage per se, but when you go from one cross section to the next one up, here's the incremental increase in maintenance costs. So those are three things that I feel like we've talked about and that we've asked for, we'd like to see, and I haven't, we haven't seen any of those numbers. And I feel like it would be really helpful to have those before we, in advance of making any kind of decision about those cross sections in the master plan. So those are three things, but if anybody else wants to
May I ask
add.
a question?
Mr. Pepperoni?
So from the comment you made earlier today, I kind of got the impression that perhaps this should be discussed again at the next Planning Commission meeting study session. And the reason I ask is that we're about to publish that agenda. We have to publish that agenda tomorrow. So should this be published on that agenda? Should it not? If it is on the agenda, is your consultant going to be ready with whatever information is still coming forward, or should we put it off beyond the next meeting? Just help guide me.
I was thinking to put it on the agenda, and then if they're not ready, we continue it. That way, we're published and okay to talk about it.
And they meaning the consultant, whether they'll have their further
whether
information.
they'll have that information that you're asking for or not by then is another question, but
Okay.
we have to decide to put it on the agenda. We put it on, and then if we're not ready with the information you want, then we put it off to the next Planning Commission study session.
So the things that James just asked for are largely just illustrative on the cross sections themselves. That shouldn't take much. But question about maintenance budgets, I don't know how much time you guys need to prepare that, but I would think that you guys got a pretty good feeling for that already.
Yeah, we have the numbers. We would just have to apply them to the different cross sections.
Okay.
And I think the spirit of what I'm trying to think about is, just making sure we get this in advance of having to make any decision. I mean, even just picking up on what you said earlier about having cross-section be determined by zoning raises all sorts of questions for me. I mean, in some ways, I can certainly see the advantage versus what seems like a relatively antiquated trip count kind of factor, but I want time to discuss that and ask questions well in advance of feeling like there was kind of a time crunch to approve a transportation master plan. But anything else that people can think of that we've talked about, that we've asked for, that I didn't include in those kind of three categories?
We talked about the idea of neighborhood cities had the sidewalks in areas that were on the right of way, not off. And Dave actually mentioned that was something they were talking about. So that would be helpful to know if that's going to happen as well.
That's part of their proposal, to move the sidewalks inside the right of way.
I don't know if all of you have seen the latest revision, but we've moved that right-of-way line to the back of sidewalks, so those sidewalks are now in the right-of-way itself.
Mr. Anderson?
I don't have anything to add necessarily to what Commissioner Ronan mentioned, but the process, am I understanding it right that we might look at it again in a work session, and then at some other date, it would be a public hearing with the Planning Commission to talk about adopting the standard So we'd still see it a couple of different times. We'd have the work session maybe to get exposed to it.
Yes.
And then we'd be
yes.
given an opportunity to,
Not only the street cross sections, but you're going to see the transportation master plan in its thickness. And so, yeah, you'll have a couple times
okay.
beyond
Yeah, I would
study
think that-
sessions.
I would agree with that this is an amendment to the city's general plan. The transportation plan is part of the city's general plan. And so this has to come before you in a formal meeting for formal motion and an actual hearing and all of that.
I appreciate that. For me, sometimes it takes a little while for things to sink in. So rather than to get to make a decision.
Yeah, we're trying to get the cross sections ahead of the transportation master plan because we have a lot of developers that want to use the smaller widths. And so in an effort to try to accommodate that, we've tried to push that ahead of the transportation master plan. So
Well,
otherwise we would bring them together as a
How close do you think
package.
you are on the whole thing?
Yeah.
Pardon me. How close do you think
Oh,
you are?
real close. Being that we've worked on it for a year, I think we're within a couple weeks of having that ready to distribute out. So,
Well, we appreciate getting on the agenda for the next session, or the next hearing and work session. And I think having the answers to those questions that Mr. Rowan articulated would be very helpful to us in the decision-making process so that, we don't become sort of the bog that it bogs down in, so we can keep it moving forward to adoption.
I mentioned that in a way, the traffic volumes and the zoning are linked because that's where we get the traffic volume from is the zone. And when you analyze the traffic, you look at, well, how many houses are there and how many trips each house generates. So if you add more units per acre, you have more traffic generated. So in a way, they're kind of the same in that we're counting numbers one way or the other of volumes on roads. So they're sort of the same philosophy.
Right. Yeah, and what I'd want to see is just a really thorough explanation of, why, a certain volume of traffic, let's say, would necessitate a certain cross-section, what the logic has been in the past. Is it going to be the same moving forward? Is there a change in logic in terms of, again, the volume, traffic volume, kind of tripping that cross-section up to the next road? And again, I've just been picking up on kind of scattered comments, and I don't feel like I've ever had a kind of really thorough explanation. And as you can probably tell, I'm just a bit on the suspicious side of, does that particular traffic volume really necessitate a bump up to the next cross-section? Can we be a little bit, can we think in new ways about the relationality between traffic volume and cross-section?
Yeah.
Do we have to continue on or persist in correlating those two numbers in the same way we've always correlated them in the past? And I want to make sure that's addressed. And again, it sounds like some of those numbers are not entirely in your hands right now as you're working with a consultant, but I certainly would not feel comfortable moving forward until I feel like we get the information we've been asking for over and over again in these conversations.
We have, and it may be helpful for you to look at our the master plan that we're currently functioning on. Because in there, it has environmental thresholds of traffic volumes that were established probably 15 years ago. And that was done by videotaping roads at certain volumes. The Planning Commission watched that video at that time. And so it gets really boring because if you're looking at a road that has, say, 1,500 cars a day on it, you see one car maybe every minute on the video. And at the time, the Planning Commission watched like 1 minute of video and said, okay, we don't want to see any more of those videos. But I think it helped them understand what volumes meant in a practical nature. So we have all of that already in place that we could get you copies of the last master plan and what those environmental
Or just
measurements
the
were.
relevant sections, or even just an explanation, kind of an oral history, so to speak, of where you broke it down for us, why certain, again, volume of traffic required a certain cross-section. So, yeah, I mean, I think those are things, and I don't know how to formalize this motion.
So we can at least go through that if our consultant isn't ready, just what we've been doing in the past.
Okay.
And so you can understand that part of it, and then we can go into when our consultant comes back and says, this is what we think ought to happen. Then
That would be different than what we've been doing in the past.
Hopefully that'll all happen in 2 weeks.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I would like to see, is a rationale for why we're going to keep doing it the same, or why we feel it's important to do it differently, correlate those two numbers in different ways, or just helping us understand the rationale so that we can access that rationale in some way that is meaningful to you and to us.
Yeah, for the most part, our residential roads are, hover around 1,000, 2,000. 2,000 would be a high number. So for the most part, all of our residential roads where houses are facing the street are very susceptible to almost any width of asphalt width, depending on whether they want parking or not.
Okay.
I don't want to shortchange any part of the discussion, but I do like the idea, and I don't know what the mechanism is exactly, but getting to a point as soon as we can to where, maybe with the planning commissions, city council, whoever it is, nod of approval, people could start to use different cross sections than what they've been using in the past in the city. So
Yeah.
it's just a thought.
Do we need to read this as
We need a formal
a
motion.
motion?
Yeah.
Did you want to read that in as a
Sure,
motion?
yeah, so I move that the engineering, public works, provide the additional information to the planning commission in the following 3 categories: proposed street sections with dimension by road classification, which would include vehicular lane widths, transit lane widths, bike lane widths, and locations of all elements included within the proposed right-of-way. 2, traffic volume threshold numbers, or trip counts that are utilized to determine street classifications, along with the source and timeline of data. And then 3, annual engineering maintenance budgets for maintenance of all elements within the right-of-way and how determined on a linear foot basis by road type. Yeah, those are the 3 categories, and I didn't hear anything in addition to those.
Great.
So I'll stop there.
Do we have a second for Mr. Rowan's motion?
I second.
Oh,
Choose between you.
He beat me.
Russ got it.
Seconded by Mr. Phillips. All those in favor of approving the motion put forth by Mr. Rowan and seconded by Mr. Phillips?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. All right, that concludes our hearing for the evening. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
I'll second that.
Seconded. Thank you. We are adjourned.
Jamie, why don't you give me your notes there?
These are Deborah's.